To the outside world, Jacob and Jessica Miller had the perfect, simple life. They lived in a modest suburban home, drove reliable but unremarkable cars, and clipped coupons for their weekly grocery trips. Jacob was a diligent data analyst at a mid-sized logistics firm, and Jessica was a part-time librarian who loved the quiet comfort of her books. They were a portrait of ordinary happiness, a love story, built not on grand gestures, but on shared laughter over burnt toast and cozy nights on a well-worn couch. But beneath this placid surface, Jacob was guarding a secret of staggering proportions, a secret worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He thought he was protecting his wife, their marriage, their very happiness. He was wrong. He had no idea that the woman sleeping beside him every night was about to give him the shock of his life. The life Jacob Miller had constructed was a masterpiece of deception, built with the precision of an architect and the paranoia of a fugitive. Their two-bedroom house on Maple Street in the quiet town of Westfield was chosen specifically for its unremarkable nature. It was the kind of house people drove past 1,000 times without ever truly seeing. The beige siding, the neatly trimmed lawn, the slightly faded welcome mat, it was all part of the camouflage. Inside, the furniture was comfortable but dated, bought from mid-range department stores during holiday sales. Their life was a carefully curated exhibition of mediocrity. To Jessica, this life was authentic. She had met Jacob at a local coffee shop 5 years ago. He'd been wearing a worn-out denim jacket and had a shy, kind smile that reached his eyes. He told her he worked in data entry, a stable but unglamorous job. He was steady, reliable, and his love felt like a warm blanket on a cold day. She had never been a materialistic woman. Growing up with parents who valued experiences over possessions, she craved stability and genuine connection. Two things Jacob seemed to offer in abundance. Their days fell into a comfortable rhythm. Jacob would leave for his office at 8 in the morning, carrying a thermos of coffee and a packed lunch. He'd complain about his demanding but dull boss, Mr. Henderson, a fictional character Jacob had invented with a surprisingly detailed backstory. He'd talk about pointless meetings and the tedious task of sorting spreadsheets. Jessica would listen sympathetically, rubbing his shoulders as he sighed about the monotony of corporate life. She would then share stories from her part-time job at the Westfield Public Library, tales of quirky patrons and the joy of discovering a dusty, forgotten classic. But Jacob's reality was a world away. After driving his 10-year-old sedan for 20 minutes toward the city, he would park it in a designated spot at a multi-level garage. From there, he would take a private elevator to a sleek, unmarked sub-level. A short walk through a sterile corridor led him to another vehicle, a gleaming black Audi A8. He would then drive to the gleaming glass tower of Miller Industries, a global technology conglomerate he had inherited from his grandfather. He wasn't Jacob Miller, the data analyst. He was Jacob Miller, the CEO, and sole heir to a fortune valued at over $900 million. His office, a sprawling suite on the top floor, offered a panoramic view of the city skyline he claimed to despise. His desk was a massive slab of polished mahogany. His chair was Italian leather, and his days were filled with high-stakes negotiations, board meetings with corporate titans, and decisions that could shift markets. His boss, Mr. Henderson, was in reality his board of directors, and his spreadsheets were complex financial portfolios that spanned continents. This elaborate charade was born from a deep-seated trauma. Jacob's father, a brilliant but soft-hearted man, had been a victim of a ruthless gold digger. Jacob had watched as his mother systematically drained his father's spirit and his bank account, her affection turning to ice the moment the money began to dwindle after a series of bad investments. The divorce had been a brutal public spectacle that left his father a broken man. From that moment, Jacob equated wealth with poison. He believed it corrupted everything it touched, especially love. He promised himself he would never make the same mistake. He would find a woman who loved him for him, the quiet, simple man he presented to the world, not the 9-figure number attached to his name. When he met Jessica, he felt he had found her. Her genuine warmth, her lack of interest in luxury, and her contentment with a simple life were everything he'd been searching for. So he doubled down on the lie, believing it was a necessary shield to protect the purity of their love. He loved her with a fierce, protective intensity, and in his mind, the lie was his greatest act of love. He was protecting her from the curse of his wealth. He was ensuring that their bond was real, untainted by the corrosive power of money. He just never stopped to consider what would happen if his carefully constructed world ever came crashing down. He never imagined that the foundation of their perfect, simple life was a lie that could break the heart of the one person he was trying to protect. It happened on a Tuesday, a day as ordinary as any other. Rain lashed against the windows of the house on Maple Street, and the grey sky seemed to press down on the quiet suburb. Jacob was away on one of his business trips, a supposed data analytics conference in Chicago. In reality, he was in Zurich, finalizing a multi-million-dollar acquisition. Jessica was enjoying the quiet solitude of the house, a rare treat. She decided to tackle a task she'd been putting off for months, cleaning out the small, cluttered study Jacob used for his work-from-home days. The room was a testament to his fabricated life. A clunky, outdated desktop computer sat on a cheap particle board desk. Stacks of files filled with dummy paperwork and printed-out spreadsheets gave the illusion of a man buried in mundane tasks. As Jessica dusted the bookshelf, her hand brushed against a thick, leather-bound portfolio that was tucked away behind a row of worn-out paperbacks. It looked out of place, too expensive and elegant for this room of carefully chosen mediocrity. Curiosity piqued, she pulled it from its hiding place. It wasn't locked. Her heart gave a little thump as she opened it. The first page was a summary sheet from a company she'd never heard of, Northwood Capital Management. Her eyes scanned the document, her brain struggling to process the words. Client Jacob D. Miller. Account value. She read the number once, then twice, certain she was misreading it. The string of zeros seemed to stretch into infinity. It wasn't a few $1,000s saved up. It was an 8-figure sum. Her breath caught in her throat. This had to be a mistake. A typo. Maybe it belonged to his father. But the name was his. The address listed was a P.O. box in the city she knew he kept for business mail. She flipped the page. More statements. Stock holdings in dozens of blue-chip companies. Bonds. Real estate investments in New York, London, and Tokyo. The documents painted a picture not of a mid-level data analyst, but of a financial titan. Jessica sank into the cheap office chair, the papers trembling in her hands. A cold dread, sharp and sickening, spread through her chest. It wasn't the money that shocked her. It was the lie. Every shared complaint about their tight budget. Every conversation about saving up for a modest vacation. Every time he'd said, "We can't afford that right now, honey." It all replayed in her mind, now tainted with the bitter taste of deceit. Her first instinct was a wave of raw, unfiltered anger. She wanted to scream. She wanted to throw the portfolio across the room. How could he? How could he build their entire life, their entire love story, on such a monumental falsehood? Did he think she was a fool? Or worse, did he think she was a gold digger, a shallow creature who would change the second she knew the truth? The insult was staggering. He didn't trust her. After 5 years of marriage, of sharing a bed, a home, and a life, the man she loved didn't trust her. The tears came, then hot and silent. She cried for the life she thought she had. She cried for the man she thought she knew. She sat there for hours as the rain beat a mournful rhythm on the roof, the portfolio lying open on the desk like an open wound. The shock gave way to a profound sense of betrayal that settled deep in her bones. As dusk fell, her grief began to crystallize into something else, something harder. She thought about confronting him the moment he walked through the door, throwing the papers in his face and demanding an explanation. But what would that achieve? He would apologize, explain his reasons that would undoubtedly be rooted in a twisted paternalistic desire to protect her. He would beg for forgiveness. And then what? Could she ever look at him the same way? Could she ever unknow this? Every loving gesture, every shared smile would forever be filtered through the lens of this deception. No. A confrontation felt too simple, too clean. The lie wasn't simple. It was a complex, tangled web that had defined every moment of their marriage. Undoing it required more than just shouting and tears. An idea, cold and clear, began to form in her mind. He had underestimated her. He had judged her character without ever giving her a chance to prove him wrong. He had placed her in a gilded cage she hadn't even known existed. Fine. If he wanted to live in a world of secrets, she would join him. But she would play the game by her own rules. She wouldn't just uncover his truth, she would build her own. She carefully placed the portfolio back where she found it, wiping her tear-stained face. When Jacob came home, she would be waiting with the same loving smile and the same gentle kiss. But behind her eyes, a quiet revolution had begun. The Westfield Public Library. Once a place of quiet refuge for Jessica, transformed into her secret university. The woman who had once found joy in classic literature now devoured texts on corporate finance, investment strategies, and market analysis. The Dewey Decimal System became her treasure map, leading her to knowledge that felt both foreign and exhilarating. She used the library's computers to dive into the world Jacob had hidden from her, her fingers flying across the keyboard with a newfound purpose. She started small, creating an anonymous online profile to track the stock market. She followed the companies listed in his portfolio, the ones he secretly owned or controlled. She learned their histories, their market positions, their leadership teams. She read shareholder reports and financial news until her eyes burned. Miller Industries was the ghost in the machine, a holding company with its fingers in dozens of tech ventures. It was notoriously private, and its CEO, her husband, was a phantom. A name whispered in elite financial circles, but with no public photos or interviews. He was a ghost, and she was married to him. The more she learned, the more the hurt of his betrayal began to morph into a strange, empowering anger. He had thought her incapable of understanding this world. He had relegated her to a life of simplicity, assuming her mind was as simple as the life he'd designed for her. The condescension of it all fueled a fire within her. She decided she needed more than just theoretical knowledge. Using a small inheritance left to her by her grandmother, a modest sum of $20,000, she and Jacob had agreed to save for a rainy day. She opened her own secret brokerage account. Her first trades were small, cautious. She invested in sectors she understood, guided by her research. Some investments paid off, Others didn't. Each loss was a lesson, each gain a small victory that emboldened her. She discovered she had a knack for it, an intuitive understanding of market trends, and a patience that the volatile world of finance often rewarded. Her secret life required meticulous planning. She used a burner phone and a private laptop she kept hidden in a loose floorboard under her closet. Her library hours became longer, a fact she explained to Jacob as taking on extra shifts to help with their finances, an irony so bitter it was almost comical. While he was in Chicago or Denver, closing 9-figure deals, she was in the library's quiet study room, executing a trade worth a few $1,000s that felt just as monumental. One day, while researching non-profit tax law for a particularly dense financial text, she stumbled upon the concept of social entrepreneurship businesses designed to solve social problems. An idea sparked. She had always been passionate about child literacy and education. What if she could combine her newfound financial acumen with her old passion? She began drafting a business plan. The idea was simple but powerful, a non-profit foundation that would provide STEM and financial literacy education to underprivileged children in their community. It would be funded not by begging for donations, but by its own savvy investment wing, using a portion of its endowment to generate returns that would make the foundation self-sustaining. She would call it the Next Gen Forward Foundation. Putting this plan into action was the most terrifying step yet. It meant moving from the shadows of the internet into the real world. Using her maiden name, Jessica Brent, she registered the foundation. She rented a small, cheap office space in a neighboring town 20 miles from Westfield. She was no longer just Jessica Miller, the librarian. She was Jessica Brent, the founder and executive director of a burgeoning non-profit. She started by running small after-school workshops herself, using her librarian skills to create engaging curriculums. The work was exhausting, but deeply fulfilling. For the first time in years, she felt like she was building something that was truly hers. At home, she played her part flawlessly. She listened to Jacob's fabricated stories of office drudgery, nodding with the perfect blend of sympathy and wifely support. One evening he came home looking particularly weary. He slumped onto the couch, and she brought him a cup of tea. "Tough day?" she asked softly. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You have no idea, Jess. Henderson is running us into the ground. Budgets, deadlines. It's just endless." She sat beside him, patting his arm. Inside her mind was racing. She had read in the Wall Street Journal that afternoon that a subsidiary of Miller Industries had just faced a major setback in a European expansion, a deal worth $50 million. His exhaustion was real, but its source was a universe away from what he claimed. "Well, you're home now," she said, her voice even. "Let's just forget about it. Let me worry about our budget. You just rest." He smiled, a tired but grateful expression on his face. "What would I do without you, Jess?" She smiled back, a perfect mask of loving contentment. "You have no idea," she thought. "You truly have no idea." 2 years passed. On the surface, life on Maple Street remained unchanged. The lie held a fragile dome over their shared existence. But beneath it, 2 worlds were hurtling towards an inevitable collision. Jacob's world was becoming increasingly unstable. A new player had emerged in the tech industry, a ruthless corporate raider named Victor Cromwell. Cromwell was everything Jacob wasn't: public, flamboyant, and brutally aggressive. His firm, Cromwell Capital, was known for hostile takeovers, buying up innovative companies, stripping them for parts, and selling off the remains for a quick, massive profit. and he had set his sights on Miller Industries. The assault began subtly. Cromwell started by acquiring smaller tech firms that were key suppliers to Miller Industries, disrupting their supply chain. Then he began buying up their publicly traded debt. Jacob, operating from his fortress of secrecy, found himself on the defensive. The pressure was immense. He worked longer hours, his business trips becoming more frequent and frantic. The strain began to show. He grew distant, his eyes clouded with a worry he couldn't share. He would come home late, the ghost of a multi-billion-dollar battle clinging to him, and try to slip back into the persona of the weary data analyst. One night, Jessica found him staring blankly at the television, his dinner untouched. "Everything okay, Jake?" she asked, her voice gentle. He flinched, startled out of his thoughts. "Yeah, fine. Just a lot of pressure at work. Henderson is panicking about the quarterly reports." Jessica knew from her research that Cromwell had just launched a direct public bid to buy a significant block of shares from a minority stakeholder in Miller Industries. The quarterly reports were a full-scale corporate war. The urge to call him out to say "I know you're lying" was a physical ache in her chest. But she held back. It wasn't time. Her own plans were not yet mature. Her world, in stark contrast to his, was thriving. The Next Gen Forward Foundation was no longer a small one-woman operation. It had grown into a respected institution. Jessica, or rather Jessica Brent, as she was known in the professional world, had proven to be a remarkably astute leader. Her unique model of a self-sustaining endowment, managed by her own surprisingly sharp investment strategies, was a roaring success. The Foundation's educational programs had expanded across the state, earning her accolades and the attention of major philanthropists. She had a real office now with a small but dedicated staff. She commanded respect in boardrooms, her soft-spoken demeanor belying a sharp, analytical mind. She had become a master of compartmentalization. At 5 p.m., she would leave the world of Jessica Brent behind. She'd change out of her tailored business suit in a gym locker room, putting on the simple jeans and sweater of Jessica Miller before driving home to Westfield. The irony was not lost on her. Jacob had lied to keep his world from touching hers, and now she was doing the exact same thing. But there was a crucial difference. His lie was built on a fear of her weakness. Hers was built on a demonstration of her strength. The crisis with Victor Cromwell escalated. Cromwell, frustrated by Jacob's private defenses, decided to go public. He leaked a story to a major financial newspaper, hinting that Miller Industries' mysterious, reclusive CEO was in over his head, that the company was vulnerable. The article didn't name Jacob, but for those in the know, the message was clear. That evening, Jacob was a wreck. He paced the small living room, his face pale. Jessica watched him, her heart a confusing mix of pity and resolve. He was trapped in a prison of his own making, and the walls were closing in. "Jake, talk to me," she finally said, stopping him by placing a hand on his arm. "Whatever it is, we can face it together." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a desperate, hunted expression. For a fleeting second, she thought he was going to confess. The words seemed to be right on his lips. He opened his mouth, then closed it, shaking his head. "It's nothing, Jess. It's just work. I'll handle it," he mumbled, pulling away. "I think I'll just go for a drive." He grabbed his keys and left the front door clicking shut behind him, leaving Jessica alone in the deafening silence of their perfect, fabricated home. She knew he wasn't just going for a drive. He was going to his real office, to his real life, to fight a war he refused to admit he was waging. The storm was no longer approaching. It was here. And she knew with chilling certainty that it would sweep away everything in its path. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in deception. A silent, tense ballet performed by two people living under the same roof, but in entirely different realities. Jacob Miller, the public data analyst, became a ghost in his own home. He was perpetually exhausted, his phone buzzing at all hours with calls he would take in hushed, urgent tones in the garage. He claimed Mr. Henderson was forcing the team into mandatory overtime to deal with a systems migration. The lies were becoming flimsy transparent, but Jessica never questioned them. Meanwhile, Jacob Miller, the clandestine CEO, was fighting the battle of his life. Victor Cromwell was relentless, a shark that had tasted blood. He was poaching key executives, launching smear campaigns in the press, and using his vast resources to drive down the value of Jacob's assets, making a hostile takeover cheaper. Jacob was pouring his personal fortune into propping up the company, a desperate move that was bleeding him dry at an alarming rate. He was isolated, trapped by his own secrecy. He couldn't rally his allies without exposing himself, and he couldn't ask for help from the one person he shared his life with. In a parallel universe just 20 miles away, Jessica Brent, the CEO of Next Gen Forward, was having a very different experience. Her foundation had become a powerhouse. Its success had attracted the attention of some of the very philanthropists and venture capitalists who had once worked with Miller Industries. They were impressed by her innovative model and her sharp financial mind. They saw her as a rising star. One of these investors was a man named Arthur Vance, an old guard financier who had been an early mentor to Jacob's grandfather. He had been pushed out of Miller Industries' board years ago over a disagreement with Jacob about the company's reclusive strategy. Vance saw in Jessica the same fire and vision he had seen in the first Miller. He requested a meeting. They met in a discreet restaurant in the city. "Ms. Brent," Arthur began, his eyes sharp and assessing over his glasses, "I've been following your work with Next Gen. It's revolutionary. Your endowment's performance in particular is extraordinary. You have a rare talent." "Thank you, Mr. Vance," Jessica replied calmly, though her heart was pounding. She knew exactly who he was. "I'll be direct," he said. "I see what Cromwell is doing to Miller Industries. It's a tragedy. The company has lost its way, hiding in the shadows. It needs new leadership, a new direction. It needs someone like you." Jessica held his gaze. "That's a very flattering thought, Mr. Vance, but I'm in the non-profit sector. Miller Industries is a different league." "Is it?" he countered. "You run a multi-million-dollar endowment with the skill of a Wall Street veteran. You build things. Cromwell only destroys." Many of the company's minority shareholders are getting nervous. They're looking for an alternative to Cromwell, a white knight. They're looking for a leader they can trust. An audacious, terrifying plan began to form in Jessica's mind. It was a gamble of epic proportions, a move so bold it could either save everything or destroy it all. "What if," she said slowly, choosing her words with surgical precision, "there was a way to shield the company, not just from Cromwell, but from its own self-imposed secrecy? A merger, perhaps. A partnership that would infuse it with a new, transparent and socially responsible purpose." Arthur Vance leaned forward, a slow smile spreading across his face. "I'm listening." Over the next few weeks, Jessica, with Arthur's covert guidance, began to move her pieces into place. Using the Foundation's powerful endowment, and backed by a consortium of investors, Arthur had gathered. Next Gen Forward began quietly buying up the available stock of Miller Industries. They also acquired the debt Cromwell had been accumulating. It was a high-risk, high-wire act. They were fighting a war on two fronts, a public battle against Cromwell's takeover and a secret one against Jacob's ignorance. At home, the strain on Jacob was reaching a breaking point. One evening he came home, his face ashen. He dropped his briefcase by the door and just stood there, looking utterly defeated. "Cromwell's made a final offer," he said, his voice hollow. He had forgotten to filter his words through his data analyst persona. He was just a man at the end of his rope. Jessica looked up from the book she was pretending to read. "Henderson's company?" she asked, keeping her tone soft and concerned. He just nodded, not even registering her question. "He's going to get it. He'll tear it apart. Everything my grandfather built. Gone." He finally looked at her, his eyes filled with despair. "Jess, I haven't been honest with you." Jessica closed her book, her heart starting to beat faster. This was it. The moment the two worlds would finally collide. "I know," she said softly. His head snapped up, his eyes wide with confusion. "You... what?" "I know you're not a data analyst, Jake," she said, her voice steady and calm. "I know about Miller Industries. I know about Victor Cromwell. And I know you're about to lose it all." The color drained from his face. He looked at her as if he were seeing a stranger, the carefully constructed walls of his life crumbling around him in real time. The silence in the small living room on Maple Street was absolute, broken only by the frantic ticking of the mantel clock and the sound of Jacob's own ragged breathing. He stared at Jessica, his mind struggling to catch up with the words she had just spoken. "I know." Two simple words that had detonated his entire reality. "How?" He finally whispered, his voice hoarse. "How long have you known?" "A long time," Jessica said, her expression unreadable. She didn't offer any more, letting the weight of his own deception settle upon him. For Jacob it was like falling through ice. The carefully maintained barrier between his two lives had been shattered. The woman he had spent years protecting with his lies was looking at him with a calm, unnerving clarity, revealing that she had seen through his charade all along. A tidal wave of emotions crashed over him, shame, fear, and a bewildering sense of exposure. "Jess, I can explain," he stammered, taking a step towards her. "I wanted to tell you, so many times. I did it to protect you, to protect us. My father, what happened with my mother. I saw what money can do to people. I didn't want it to poison us. I wanted you to love me, for me, not for..." He gestured vaguely, at a loss for words to describe the fortune that had been his secret burden. "For your money," she finished for him, her voice cool and even. "You thought my love was so conditional, so shallow, that the knowledge of your wealth would instantly turn me into a different person. No, not you. I was afraid." He admitted, his shoulders slumping in defeat. The mighty CEO was gone, replaced by a vulnerable, frightened man. I was terrified of losing the only real thing in my life. And now, because of my stupidity, because I tried to handle this all myself, I'm going to lose everything anyway. Cromwell has me cornered. The board is going to accept his offer tomorrow morning. It's over." He sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. The full weight of his failure, both as a CEO and as a husband, pressed down on him. He had not only failed to protect his grandfather's legacy, but he had also insulted the integrity of the woman he loved. He had lost on all fronts. He had built a prison of lies and was now its only inmate. He expected shouting. He expected tears of rage. He expected her to pack a bag and walk out the door, and frankly, he wouldn't have blamed her. He had earned her contempt. But Jessica did none of those things. She sat down in the armchair opposite him, her posture poised and deliberate. The librarian, the simple homemaker, had vanished. In her place was a woman of formidable composure. "You're right about one thing," she said, her voice cutting through his despair. "It's over. Your way of doing things, hiding in the shadows, underestimating the people around you, that's over." Jacob looked up, confused. This wasn't the reaction he had braced himself for. There was no anger in her voice, only a steely resolve he had never heard before. "What are you talking about?" Instead of answering, Jessica rose and walked to the hallway closet. She didn't retrieve a suitcase. She came back with a sleek leather briefcase he had never seen before. She placed it on the coffee table between them and clicked it open. Inside were not books or knitting needles, but stacks of professionally bound documents. She slid one folder across the table towards him. It was thick with a simple, elegant logo on the front. He didn't recognize a stylized tree with roots and branches intertwined in a circle. Below it were the words, "Next Gen Forward Foundation." "I don't understand," he said, his voice barely a whisper, as he opened the folder. The first page was a letter of intent. His eyes scanned the text, but the words refused to make sense. It was a formal offer addressed to the board of directors of Miller Industries. It was a counteroffer to the one made by Cromwell Capital. It proposed a strategic merger that would not only inject massive capital into the company, but also absorb its key assets into a new, forward-thinking corporate structure. The offer was robust, intelligent, and financially sound. It was better than Cromwell's. It was a white knight offer, designed to save the company, not dismantle it. He stared at the signature line, at the bottom of the letter, his blood turning to ice. The offer was signed by Ms. Jessica Brent, founder and executive director of Next Gen Forward. Jacob's world tilted on its axis. He read the signature again, then looked from the document to his wife's face. The quiet, unassuming woman he had married, the part-time librarian he thought he was shielding from the complexities of his life, was the architect of this sophisticated multi-million-dollar corporate maneuver. The name Jessica Brent, her maiden name, stared up at him, a symbol of a whole identity she had built without his knowledge. Next Gen Forward. He breathed the words, feeling alien in his mouth. Jessica Brent. "What is this?" "It's my foundation," she said, her voice betraying no emotion. "I started it 2.5 years ago. We focus on providing STEM and financial literacy programs to children in underserved communities. And our endowment, which I manage, has performed rather well." That was the understatement of the century. He flipped through the folder, his hands shaking. He saw detailed financial statements, asset allocations, and performance reports that would make any Wall Street fund manager weep with envy. Her foundation wasn't just successful. It was a financial powerhouse with a net worth that was staggering. He saw the trail of stock purchases, the strategic acquisition of his company's debt from other firms, the very debt Cromwell had been trying to consolidate. She hadn't just built a non-profit. She had secretly forged a shield around his entire empire right under his nose. She had been fighting Cromwell in the open market, while he had been fighting him from the shadows, and he'd had no idea they were even on the same battlefield. How Semu was all he could manage. The money, the expertise. Where did all of this come from? The seed money was my grandmother's inheritance, she explained calmly. The $20,000 we were saving for a rainy day. As for the expertise, A faint, wry smile touched her lips. "I'm a librarian, Jacob. I know how to do research. It turns out your portfolio was a very educational document." The memory of the misplaced portfolio from years ago flashed in his mind. He had thought it was a close call, a crisis averted. He never imagined it was the single spark that had ignited this inferno of change. He had underestimated her at every turn. He had treated her like a fragile doll to be protected while she had been quietly becoming a queen on the chessboard. He didn't even know they were playing on. "You knew," he said, the full weight of it finally hitting him. "All this time. Every night you listened to my stupid made-up stories about Mr. Henderson. You knew." "I knew," she confirmed, "and every day I waited for you to trust me. I waited for you to see me as a partner, not a liability. You never did. So I decided to become a partner you couldn't ignore." The shocking reaction he had always feared, the tears, the greed, the anger paled in comparison to this reality. This was so much more profound, so much more devastating to his ego. She hadn't left him. She hadn't screamed at him. She had quietly and brilliantly outmaneuvered him. She had saved his company not out of wifely duty, but as a strategic business decision from a position of power. He looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time. The quiet strength he had always admired was not meekness. It was immense, controlled power. Her intelligence, which he'd appreciated in their discussions about books and world events, was a razor-sharp intellect, capable of navigating the most treacherous corporate waters. The love he had tried to preserve by building a wall of lies had been strong enough all along to handle the truth. It was his trust that had been too weak. "The board," he said numbly. "They won't just accept an offer from an unknown foundation." "They won't be," Jessica said, sliding another document from her briefcase. It was a list of proxies and letters of support. "I haven't been working alone. Arthur Vance and a consortium of minority shareholders who are tired of your reclusive leadership are backing our offer. They believe in our vision, a new Miller Industries one that is public, transparent, and has a social conscience at its core, led by next-gen forward." She paused, letting the final unspoken piece of the puzzle hang in the air. "Led by me." There it was, the final checkmate. She wasn't just saving his company. She was taking it. His shock gave way to a dawning, humbling sense of awe. He had spent his life afraid of a gold digger, only to discover he was married to a titan. He had hidden his kingdom from her, and in response, she had gone out and built her own. And now her kingdom was about to absorb his. He looked at the woman sitting across from him, this brilliant, formidable stranger who was his wife, and for the first time he understood the true magnitude of his foolishness. He didn't say a word. He just started to laugh. A hollow, broken, and utterly bewildered laugh. The sound of Jacob's laughter echoed in the small room, a strange, unhinged noise that was equal parts despair and disbelief. It wasn't a laugh of joy or humor, but the sound of a man whose entire worldview had been systematically dismantled in the space of 10 minutes. Jessica watched him, her expression unchanging, allowing him the space to process the seismic shock. When his laughter subsided, he looked up at her, his eyes raw with a humility she had never seen in him before. The arrogance of the secret billionaire, the paternalistic protector, it had all been stripped away. All that was left was the man exposed and vulnerable. "You did all this," he said, his voice quiet with awe as he gestured towards the documents on the table. "While I was playing a fool's game, you were building an empire." "I was building a life, Jacob," she corrected him gently. "My own life. I did it because you left me no choice. You showed me that the life we had wasn't entirely real, so I had to create something that was." This was the conversation they should have had years ago. All the secrets, fears, and resentments that had festered in the silence between them came pouring out. He told her everything about his father's painful history, the deep scars left by his mother's betrayal, and the profound fear that had driven him to build his fortress of lies. He confessed that his deception wasn't born from a lack of love for her, but from a brokenness within himself. Jessica listened without judgment, and then she shared her own story. She told him of the heart-wrenching pain she felt upon discovering his secret, the sting of his mistrust that felt sharper than any betrayal. She explained how that pain had morphed into a resolve to prove him wrong, to prove to herself that she was more than the simple, naive woman he perceived her to be. "I never wanted your money, Jacob," she said, her voice finally cracking with the emotion she had held back for so long. "I just wanted your trust. I wanted all of you, not just the edited version you thought I could handle." In that moment, standing amidst the wreckage of their old life, they began to lay the foundation for a new one. The next morning, Jacob didn't go to his secret office. Instead, he and Jessica drove into the city together in her car. They walked into the emergency board meeting for Miller Industries, not as husband and wife in the traditional sense, but as two CEOs preparing for a merger. The board was stunned. The reclusive phantom leader of their company appeared in the flesh, but he immediately ceded the floor to the woman beside him. Jessica, poised, articulate, and in complete command of her material, laid out her vision. She spoke not of hostile takeovers, but of a synergistic partnership. She presented a future where Miller Industries' technological prowess would be paired with Next-Gen Forward's mission for social good. A company that would not only dominate the market, but also make a tangible difference in the world. When Victor Cromwell and his team arrived expecting a swift victory, they walked into a unified front they could not break. Jessica's offer, backed by Jacob's full endorsement and the support of key shareholders, was overwhelmingly approved. Cromwell was defeated. His predatory ambitions thwarted not by a hidden billionaire, but by a part-time librarian he had never even heard of. Their life on Maple Street ended that week. They sold the house that had been the stage for their elaborate play and moved into a penthouse apartment overlooking the city. But the luxury felt different now. It wasn't a secret to be hidden, but a tool to be used, a resource for the new shared life they were building. Jacob took a different role in the new company, which they renamed the Miller-Brent Initiative. He stepped away from the CEO position, willingly becoming the head of research and development, pouring his energy into the innovation he truly loved. He was happier, freer than he had ever been. Jessica as CEO flourished. She was a natural leader, visionary, and empathetic, guiding the company to new heights of success and social impact. They were no longer living separate lives under one roof. They were true partners in the boardroom and at home. Their love story wasn't the simple, easy fairy tale Jacob had tried to write. It was a complex, messy, and ultimately far more beautiful story of two people who had to tear down a life of lies to finally find their truth. Their happily ever after wasn't built on a carefully protected illusion, but on the solid, unshakable foundation of trust, respect, and a partnership of equals. 5 years later, the grand ballroom of the Intercontinental Hotel glittered under the light of a dozen crystal chandeliers. It was the annual National Business Leadership Awards, the most prestigious event in the corporate calendar. At the podium stood Jessica Miller, Brent, the CEO of the Miller-Brent Initiative. a picture of grace and authority in a simple, elegant navy gown. The applause that had thundered through the room moments ago was just beginning to fade. In the front row, Jacob watched his wife, his heart full of a pride so immense it felt tangible. He was not here as a reclusive billionaire or a shadow CEO, but simply as Jacob Miller, the company's chief innovation officer and Jessica's husband. He caught her eye, and she gave him a small, almost imperceptible smile before turning back to the microphone. "Thank you," Jessica began, her voice clear and steady. "To receive the award for the most socially responsible company is a profound honor. But I must be clear, this award doesn't belong to one person. It belongs to every employee who believes in our dual mission, that progress without purpose is meaningless, and that profit without principle is a hollow victory." She spoke of their work of bringing cutting-edge technology to developing nations, of their foundation that now served over 100,000 children nationwide, and of their commitment to a transparent, ethical business model. "For a long time," she continued, her gaze sweeping over the audience of industry titans, "the business world has operated under the assumption that we must build walls to protect what we have. We've learned that the opposite is true. True strength, true legacy comes not from building walls, but from building bridges." Jacob knew she was speaking not just of business philosophy, but of their own story. The wall he had built around their marriage had almost destroyed them. The bridges she had built had saved them. "Finally," Jessica said, her eyes finding Jacob's once more, "I want to thank my partner in all things, my husband, Jacob. His brilliance is the engine of our innovation, but his trust is the foundation of our success. He taught me that it is never too late to tear down a life of secrets and build a new one based on truth." The applause that followed was even louder than the first. Later that night, they stood on the balcony of their penthouse, the city lights spread before them like a blanket of fallen stars. The heavy glass award sat on the mantelpiece inside, gleaming in the soft light. Jacob came up behind Jessica, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "You were incredible tonight," he said softly. "We were," she corrected him, leaning back into his embrace. "Everything we do together." He smiled, breathing in the scent of her hair. "I was just thinking about Victor Cromwell," he said. "I read last week that his firm officially dissolved. Chapter 7 Bankruptcy. All those companies he tore apart, all that destruction. It all just amounted to nothing." "It's because he was building on a foundation of greed," Jessica murmured, looking out at the skyline. "It's like building on sand. It can never last." Jacob turned her around to face him, his hands gentle on her arms. "And what are we building on?" She looked into his eyes, and he saw the same warmth and love that had captivated him in a coffee shop a decade ago. But now it was deeper, richer, forged in the fires of their shared past. "We're building on something real, Jake," she said. "Something that will outlast both of us." Her gaze drifted to a silver frame on the table beside them. It was a recent photo from the first graduating class of a next-gen forward scholarship program. In it, 20 bright-eyed, smiling teenagers once deemed underprivileged stood ready to attend top universities. They were the architects, doctors, and engineers of the future. That was their legacy. Not the 9-figure number in a bank account, not the corporate towers or the fancy awards, but the bridges they had built to the next generation. Jacob pulled her close, and as they stood together, partners in every sense of the word, they were no longer defined by the secrets of the past, but by the shared, transparent promise of the future they were creating together. That's the incredible story of Jacob and Jessica Miller, a marriage built on a secret fortune and a lie meant to protect it. Jacob thought he was shielding his wife from the corrupting influence of wealth, but in the end, he was only shielding himself from the truth of her incredible strength. Her reaction wasn't the anger he feared, but a brilliant display of power and intelligence that not only saved his company, but transformed their lives forever. It's a powerful reminder that the greatest asset in any relationship isn't money or security, but unconditional trust. What do you think you would have done in Jessica's shoes? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who loves a story of hidden strength, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will leave you speechless. Thank you for listening.